Alrighty, guys, and welcome back to the Basketball Fix podcast. Now, today we're going to be continuing on with our NBL25 season previews and touching on what these teams have been doing in the off-season of NBL25. Now, last episode we touched on Southeast Melbourne Phoenix, and today we're going to be touching on ninth-placed Adelaide 36ers. Now, before we jump into today's episode, I'm joined, as always, by Ryan and Jeremy. How you guys been going, and what you guys been up to?
Hey mate, yeah, going well. A little bit tired chasing after the kids here in the Swedish summer. The sun is shining to all hours of the evening, so the kids never want to sleep. But it means there's a lot of time to consume as much basketball media as possible. And it's getting so close now to the start of NBL 25, so it's very exciting.
Yeah, man, I'm loving diving into these NBL reviews, previews. Yeah, NBL 25 around the corner. Adelaide, today's topic. Yeah, really, really interesting stuff. So it's going to be a great episode, and I'm really looking forward to seeing your guys' opinions and obviously giving my own.
Yeah, and Ryan, to yourself, mate, and also Jez, I'm very jealous of obviously the sunshine that you guys are copping. We're copping torrential downpours over here in Perth, and it's actually been somewhat annoying. Obviously, we're recording these podcasts of how heavy the rain has been on the tin shed. Now, I just want to give out a quick little shout out as well to South Sudan and the Australian Boomers as well, who have started their Olympic campaigns off in relatively good fashion, both walking away in winners of their first matchups, and looking forward to seeing what they do for the rest of the Olympic campaign. Obviously, one of the guys who we're going to be touching on for the Adelaide 36ers and Sunday Detch has been doing some great stuff for the South Sudanese basketball team. But let's touch on what the Adelaide 36ers got up to last season. Now, this was an up and down season, very, very shaky at times for the Adelaide 36ers, and then all of a sudden they turned into finals contenders and nearly made the NBL finals. Now, you know, you sort of say that and you go, well, they finished ninth. How have they nearly made the NBL finals? They were very, very close and knocking down on the doors of the top 5 or 6. And I was really excited to see, obviously, the way that they finished the NBL season. And, you know, I think it was really the resurgence of a guy like Isaac Humphries, who really was made the focal point after a coaching change from CJ Bruton to Scott Ninez. And obviously, you're touching on Trey Kell and Dejan Vasiljevic as well, who realistically took over as I think one of the best 1-2 punches in the NBL as well in last season. So let's get into today's episode, because I've been looking forward to talking about Adelaide 36ers, and we're going to start off with this season up and coming and who they have lost. I'm going to start with yourself, Ryan, because you've got some interesting thoughts.
Yeah, well, mate, one of the biggest losses for this team is obviously Mitch McCarron. Team captain, a leader, marquee player, has had a massive career in this league. Now going over to the Breakers, and just a year ago there were a lot of speculation that he was going to leave the team, and he came out in the media and said, look, I don't want to leave Adelaide, this is my home, I want to see results in this team. And 12 months later, the contract's over, and whether it was I'm not especially involved in the contract saga here, if it was a mutual decision or if he chose, but now he's going over to New Zealand, and this team then now loses that leadership, not only on court but in the locker room. He is said to be an amazing locker room guy, and with a kind of a rebuild happening here with the sacking of Bruton and Ninez being appointed as a new coach, and he's seen that resurgence. It'll be interesting around the dynamics of what role did McCarron have in the team in that kind of resurgence in the middle of the season there. Mostly off the court is what I'm interested to see, how that dynamic is going to change for next season for them. But it's really hard to replace that in any team, in any sport, and you always have that kind of not opportunity, but risk of regression when you have a team overperform and they're out because they got a new coach and they're changing the focal point of their team, and they come out and they do really well, and they have kind of a fade back in the next season because it was, that motivation is now gone and they have an expectation on their shoulders. And you think of a guy like McCarron who, as I said, had a massive career. He averaged like over 30 minutes ever since his second year in the season with in the NBL with Cairns, and then part of that 2021 championship team with Melbourne, and then was a team captain Adelaide, and then went down last year to only 19 minutes, and his output dropped accordingly. Whether that was because they knew he was going to move, or it was just he fell out of favour with Niners, or what it was, I don't know. I'm an amateur viewer of this sport, but it's not really respectful from, I think, the organisation to kind of push him out like that, and maybe that's why we see him out of this team now and no longer with the 36ers.
Yeah, and Jez, some of your thoughts, mate, obviously, about some of the players who have left the Adelaide 36ers in the off-season.
Yeah, well, obviously, Mitch McCarron is big, especially when you're talking about, Ninnis coming in, and his biggest focus, he's been very, very vocal about, keeping local players, homegrown players, leadership, and then all of a sudden their main leader is out, which, I think it is. It's something that they haven't replaced yet. When we look a little bit further in the show about, who they've signed. So Ryan brings up some really, really good points about, okay, what have they done to build leadership in a group that needs leadership? So it is, it's massive that he's gone, but also another massive puzzle piece that left is Trey Kell. He was phenomenal in the back end of the season. He's a huge loss. His offensive work and just that combination, they built this sort of really, really strong trio at the end of the season when they turned the league upside down, beating some of the big teams in their last little push to the end of the year. And like you said earlier in the intro, Josh, where they were 1 win or 2 wins away from being a top 6 side. So it's massive, and Trey Kell's going to be sort of really, really hard to replace. He's had 2 extremely good seasons in the NBL and look to be a real key puzzle piece for Illawarra when we jump into them in future episodes. So he's one of the sort of players that you relied on to get you a double-double every game. He was great on the boards. He was a point scorer, and he played that really key role in that trio with DJ and Humphreys. So that's a massive loss for the 36ers, and I'm not really quite sure if they've done enough to replace him, but that obviously we'll chat about a little bit later. Josh, what are your thoughts, man, and who were some of the key outs for you and the 36ers?
Yeah, I think obviously those 2 guys that you guys have mentioned are major outs, and this one is another big out. I think the way that he's, I guess, sort of, what's the best way? Fell in love with Adelaide, and the Adelaide fans fell in love with him. I'm speaking of Jacob Wiley now. I think he's a massive loss for, I guess we're speaking about culture and leadership, and this guy oozes both. And I think his minutes in the rotation diminished very, very quickly under Scott Ninez, and he's was a really, really good, I guess, contributor under CJ Bruton. And for whatever reason, Ninez has decided to go a bit younger and a bit more athletic, I think personally, or whatever the decision was to obviously leave Wiley out of the rotation. But his minutes did definitely drop, and I think it sort of does come down to potentially Isaac Humphreys, who was made the focal point of the offense. And I think it was realistically, to do with Wiley not being a great outside shooter, and he's a guy who does his best work inside of the post. And Isaac Humphreys is the exact same player. And if you've got Jacob Wiley and Humphreys in there at the exact same time, Wiley is just going to be bringing his defender to double team Isaac Humphreys, who was looking, as the premier big man towards the back end of the season in NBL25. So, it's a massive loss, obviously, for the Adelaide 36ers in terms of leadership and culture. And we've been touching on these 3 guys, so far. And all we're saying is they've lost leadership and, that culture, I guess. And it's some worrying signs going forward for the Adelaide 36ers, because unless they replace that with those sort of top tier leaders and top tier, culture setters and all that sort of stuff, I just really see them regressing in NBL25. And it's a scary sight, because you're second bottom on the ladder in NBL24. And if we're talking about regressing, there's only one step back, and that's right to the bottom. So it's going to be interesting. But Jez, have you got some questions about Jacob Wiley or the 36ers in general?
Yeah, like it's with the key topic already while we've started talking is this culture, and Ninnis that's all he's talked about, and it just feels like I don't know, I don't see where they're like what he's building. Do you have belief? He's obviously had an illustrious NBL career himself. He's been through the washer. He's been through the washer at Adelaide as a coach and came in and sort of got a half a chance and then got the sack. And now they've brought him back, and you listen to some of the stuff you hear around and some of these interviews, and he's just like, okay, the club's changed and they're a forward-focused team, and they're really sort of also looking towards the future, like we mentioned in the Southeast Melbourne podcast as well. But do you feel that's why he's sort of done a little mini clean out and starting to focus, on two key puzzle pieces that they have in DJ and Isaac Humphries that are players that can stay at the Adelaide 36ers for a long time and build the club around them. And okay. And then if there's a small fit like Wiley, who is an incredible player, and like you said, very, very loved by the Adelaide fans, but give him the boot, move on Trey Kell, who, he's going to his now third team in 3 seasons. Is it something that, he's just like, all right, I've got these two guys, I need to find the pieces that are going to best fit around them?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question, and we talked to Nick Marshall of the Adelaide 36ers, and shout out Nick. He's going to have a massive season for this team going forward, and we touched on Scott Ninez and obviously I guess the resurgence that we saw with a few of the younger guys, and obviously some of the older guys as well, who really I guess had defined roles within the Adelaide 36ers rotation. And Nick sort of said that Nini is one of those guys who is really, really good with the young players. And I look at a guy like Alex Starling and even Nick himself, and they're the future of the Adelaide 36ers. Starling is a guy who I liken in a way to Jacob Wiley. So is Scott Ninez sort of sitting there going, hey, I've got a younger version who's a local, of the same player where we can go out and find a need in somewhere else that we potentially do need. So how about we replace Starling with Wiley, and then we've got Nick Marshall coming through as well, who he's not going to be Trey Kell this season, but in the future could he be a Trey Kell sort of player. So, when we're touching on the Adelaide 36ers, it does seem that, they're looking more towards the future, and I'm somewhat confused by that because I don't think they're actually that far away from the rest of the competition. I'm not sure if they're a contending team right now, but I still think they're only 1 or 2 pieces away from really contending in the NBL and having a good crack at it. We saw the back end of the season. They were taking down absolutely everyone, and eventually, their run was halted by the Tasmanian Jack Jumpers, who eventually went on to win the NBL championship. So, it's a very interesting one because obviously Scott Ninez is buying himself some time as the head coach of the Adelaide 36ers by doing a rebuild and making sure everyone knows it's a rebuild. But yeah, it's going to be a very interesting one. But we're touching on the rebuild, and this one actually surprised me as well, who's a guy who left the Adelaide 36ers, and that is Kyron Galloway. Now, he's a guy who I think is full of potential. He's a guy who's gone over to the 40 factory over there in Cairns, which Ryan loved last episode as well. And we're touching on the NBL improvement ideas and all that sort of stuff as well. But Kyron's a very young and exciting prospect who I'm very excited to see what he does in the Cairns Taipans uniform. And he's a guy who, towards the back end of the season, I think Scott Ninez really showed, hey, I want to keep you on this roster. He was a guy who was taking the minutes off Jacob Wiley. And I think the biggest reason was he can knock down the three-point shot, but he can also drive to the basket and really, I guess, make those tough shots as well around the rim. So he's a massive loss for the Adelaide 36ers going forward. And, I just think the way that they're going right now, this one really surprised me. We've seen his brother obviously go over to the NBA and sign a 2-way deal with the Milwaukee Bucks. And I think this guy has got a lot of potential, and he's going to be, I think, sorely missed going forward in the NBL because it's going to be a very interesting watch to see how he develops in his NBL career. Now, that is obviously who they have lost from last season in NBL24. Now, let's obviously touch on a couple of guys who they have recently signed ahead of the NBL25 season. Now, the most notable player is Kendrick Davis. Now, he's a new point guard, and obviously they've been trying to replace the minutes and the opportunity and also the output that Trey Kell III did bring to the Adelaide 36ers towards the back end of the season. Now, it's going to be interesting because this guy was undrafted in the 2023 NBA draft before eventually signing with the Golden State Warriors on some sort of a 10-day deal, and then was eventually released and then re-signed back with their G League team, the Santa Cruz Warriors. Now, the one thing that I sort of want to flag with Kendrick Davis is the fact that he obviously spent all 4 years in college, which is completely fine. But the biggest flag for me is he spent all 4 years at different colleges. Now, that's a bit of a worry for me because there's always questions around that. Was it his family was moving, he had to move for family reasons, or is it due to academics and he wasn't sort of hitting the academic quota that he needed to at those particular colleges, had to move around to find a better school for him? Or the biggest one is his, I guess, culture and leadership dog shit? And that's the biggest question. And we've seen in recent seasons with the Adelaide 36ers, their front office has been able to find some of the shittest imports we've seen in recent history. Now, they might be great players, but I'm sorry, off the court, they are some of the worst people that we've ever had in the NBL. Look at a guy like Craig Randall III, who was blowing up at CJ Bruton in-game, other players in-game. Apparently the off-court stuff was just horrendous as well. You know, you look at him, and then you look back to last season, they signed an importer, I can't even remember his name, he wasn't even that good, who didn't even start the NBL season and was gone before the first game had even started. So they're a team who has really realistically been a basket case throughout the last couple of seasons in signing these imports. And are we about to see another franchise sort of import player who goes to waste, and another season for this franchise that goes to waste as well? I'd hate to see that personally, but I've got my reservations about Kendrick, and hopefully he comes out there and proves me wrong. But it's
Josh, would you really hate to see that happen? Being obviously your Perth Wildcats passion is coming out here in your almost hatred for the signings of the Adelaide 36ers and their imports. Would you really be that upset if they signed another dodgy import, mate, or what?
Yeah, look, no, quite frankly, I would not be disappointed at all. If I'm being completely honest with you, mate, I wouldn't give a rat's ass if they signed another shit import. But yeah, it's going to be interesting because we've obviously always loved the Perth Wildcats Adelaide 36ers rivalry over the years, and I'd love to see Perth absolutely nail another 3 or 4 winless season for the Adelaide 36ers against the Perth Wildcats going forward. But you've got one more guy as well.
Has to always be a basket case team in a league, no matter what league it is or what sport. There has to be a team that just actively ruins their own chances.
Yeah, the shit kickers of the league. Like you said, there's always got to be one, and they're fun to poke at, and I think it's always rewarding for their fans when those teams have a good little run as well. But Jez, you've got another player, and they've only signed 2 players so far, and Kendrick Davis, and one guy that you're going to touch on, and I'm personally excited about him, but you've got some reservations about him.
Yeah, Lat Mayan coming over from Cairns. Like you say that I do have reservations because you sort of look at, all right, last season he was averaging 17.4 minutes with just 6.9 points and 3.5 rebounds. Now, I look at that and compare that to what he was actually doing in NBL 1 in the 2 seasons prior to coming up and playing in the NBL, and he's almost like tripling that. Like he was averaging 19.9 points. He was averaging 7.5 rebounds a game. And like, I just have some questions. Like, I also think he has been good in patches and was good last season, but I'm a bit worried that maybe the jump from NBL 1, where he was so dominant, and obviously a lot of players are before they take the leap, but he hasn't really. He's had maybe the first season you can rule out, but it was his second season last year, and he still couldn't produce like maybe some of these other players have when they've been moved, obviously, from the NBL 1 and get their full-time contracts. And maybe he has underperformed there. And yeah, he obviously was in the Ford factory, but the Ford factory has now let him go after 2 seasons. And is there a reason why? Is maybe this jump too big for him to come up and play against in the NBL league and not in NBL 1?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I've been very hot on this guy from the start, and I think this is a terrific signing for the Adelaide 36ers in terms of where they want to go in a few seasons. And the way that I'll counter what you've said there, Jez, is the fact that I think, we talk about the Ford factory, and it's very beneficial to some players, but it's also the death of some players as well, because there's 2 or 3 players fighting for one position, and Adam Ford doesn't really tend to pick 1 or 2 guys by the end of the season. He'll continue with all 3 guys towards the back end of the year. So when we touch on Lat Mayan's statistics, there may be a game where he's gone out there and averaged, let's just say 10 points over a 3-game period where he's played anywhere between 18 and 21 minutes. But then there would also be a 3-game patch later on in the season where he's played anywhere between 2 and 3 minutes and not even scored in those particular games. So sometimes with his averages, I would be a little bit concerned, obviously, when you're reading too much into him, because what I saw, and the eye test is always the one when you've got a guy who can be very low-minute players and very high-minute players. The eye test tells you the most, and the eye test is telling me that this is a guy who is a confidence player. He's not afraid to shoot from anywhere. He's not afraid to even just run out and just shoot 5 or 6 shots and miss them all. He'll shoot the next shot coming forward. So, he's a guy who wanted to come back to Adelaide, which has been a little bit of a rarity over the last couple of seasons. Most guys aren't wanting to come back to the Adelaide 36ers because of what's been going on. So you get that local talent coming back home to play for his local team. And, I just think the hunger that he's going to have coming into this season, because I feel like personally, unless obviously something changes dramatically, but I think he's going to have the starting small forward position locked up to himself, and it's going to be interesting to see who are behind him, if it's a Nick Marshall or, maybe like a Jason Kadee plays some sort of small ball lineup. But I just think the way that he's been building in his NBL career so far, and he's going to finally get the chance to be the number one guy, I guess, in that position, I think we're going to really see him take the next step.
Sorry, I'm going to cut you off, but I don't really see Ford gave all of their bigs these chances to come and play and have their shot, and he, like you mentioned, say some games he got big minutes and big points, but then there were some games where he had big minutes and had no points. Like there wasn't a lack of chances up there in Cairns to get big points, big minutes, but you need to be consistent, and if you're getting minutes and you're putting up 4 points from 21 minutes in games, when you're there to be a big and only getting sort of 4 rebounds, we're discussing some of the guys that are getting like 10 minutes and posting 5 rebounds. You need to take those opportunities, and that's what this league is all about. So, I'm more concerned that he's going to go down to Adelaide and maybe not be all that he could be, and he's obviously going to be, trying to fit into the rotation there. And local boy, and that is great that he's gone back, and maybe he plays better being down there. His family's from Adelaide and are there, and he's got that connection. But I don't know. I'm just not as sold. But sorry to cut you off.
And I can understand. No, and I definitely understand where that's coming from as well. And like I said, he is somewhat of a confidence player. And, if you start out a game, say 0-3 and get ripped off the court, it doesn't matter who you are at a young player, you're still going to be somewhat, I guess, a little bit gun-shy in a way. He's not technically gun-shy most of the time, but speaking, we go back to Nick Marshall as well, in his interview, Scott Ninez seems to be a guy where it's like, hey, all the, I guess all the faith is within you guys. If you guys make a mistake, if you guys miss a shot, it's the next play and the next time down the court. And I really think that Lat Main is really going to benefit from that going forward because, like we mentioned, there's 3 or 4 guys fighting for any particular spot in the Kansas Taipans lineup. And, it can get very heated sometimes because it's weird. We saw a guy like Sam Menenga last year put up 21 points and 9 rebounds. The next game, he didn't even play a minute. There was no injuries. There was no nothing. It was just Adam Ford being Adam Ford. And I think he's sometimes the biggest, I guess, killer of his own foot, really, sometimes. He sort of makes some really questionable calls going forward. So I just think with him getting the consistent minutes for the Adelaide 36ers, having that starting role sewed up, I think he will have that going forward. I think it's going to be very beneficial for Lat Main going forward. But Ryan, you got some thoughts on him as well, mate?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's any risk for almost a complacency aspect. If he's coming here and expecting to be, the shoe-in for that role, is the lack of pressure maybe on his minutes, or that that other guy wanting to take that role, is that going to maybe affect him in a negative way, that he's just thinking, okay, well, I can just do whatever I want to do here because there's no one fighting for my spot? Or is there someone which you think maybe will have a bit of pressure coming up behind and saying, hey, if you fuck up, that's my role?
Yeah, I look at, and we've mentioned him a few times, Nick Marshall. I think he's the guy who's going to be right up Lat Main's clacker the whole season, making sure that, hey, you've got to be playing good, you've got to be playing consistent, and if you're not, I'm going to stake your minutes, because Nick's going to be a guy, and he's going to be a guy like Lat who they're going to be working hard in the gym to obviously get as many minutes as they can and as many reps as they can to show what they can do, because that's what's going to happen going forward, because they're 2 young players who are very exciting and both deserve that starting roster role in that team. But it's only going to be one of them as well. So, Jeremy, who do you think, and what are some of your thoughts as well, mate?
Yeah, but like it's just that, what the danger is for him is that, Nick Marshall's going to be up his clacker, as you say. And we've sort of, in previous podcasts where you've interviewed Nick, you see the sort of competitor he is, and he hasn't had it easy, and he thrives in that environment to, all right, I'm going to take my role, I'm going to step up, and I'm going to play. And it felt like he sort of come into his own, obviously, last season, and in the minutes that he got, and did a really, really great job. But all of a sudden, Lat Mayan's going to be in that same situation again, and maybe he's not one of these pressure players, and then he's just going to sort of fall out and not take those chances again because he's not one of these players that can compete for that role. So, it's going to be really, really interesting to see how it all pans out for Lat Mayan, and he he absolutely can be one of the top guys, but he needs to work on that self-confidence and take his place in the team, because otherwise someone else is going to be right in there, most likely Nick Marshall trying to take it. So I don't know, we'll see.
No, definitely we'll see, and it's going to be a very interesting season for the Adelaide 36ers in NBL25, and I'm excited to see all these young kids' development, especially in the NBL season, and obviously for the Adelaide 36ers. Now, let's get into touching on what were some of their needs coming into the NBL25 season. Now, a few things that we've mentioned throughout the whole podcast is, I think the most important thing, a strong leader. I think also some playmakers, some really good scorers, and I think some young talent to build around going forward. Now, I think they pretty much just need anything right now to change in their culture. I think they just need to bring in and reset anything and just obviously look forward to the future and obviously developing these kids to become the future of the NBL and the Adelaide 36ers. Now, I'm just going to kick this one off quickly. Obviously, with have they been successful so far this season in the off-season, obviously, with some of their signings. And the big one that I want to touch on quickly, and it hasn't been announced 100%, but reporting from the NBL, Olgun Ulich as well, apparently the Adelaide 36ers are really closing in on signing one of Jarrell Martin or Zylan Cheatham. So Jarrell Martin is a guy who played in a championship for the Sydney Kings back in the day. I think it would have been an NBL 21, 22 potentially. And then obviously Zylan Cheatham, who we've seen in the NBL most recently for the New Zealand Breakers. I'm looking forward to seeing who they sign. Personally, for myself, they need to go out and get Zylan Cheatham. He's a guy who can score outside. He's a really good attacker on the basket. He's a high-energy guy. He's going to be what they need going forward, especially the Adelaide crowd would love that. I look at him as somewhat of a replacement for Jacob Wiley, but can obviously score from the outside as well, and I think will really complement Isaac Humphries. But Jarrell Martin is a very solid NBL player as well, and I realistically think whatever way they go, they're not going to be disappointed. But Jez, have you got some thoughts on that? Obviously, major, I guess, news announcement coming from today.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about Martin, to be honest, but I think Zylan Cheatham can certainly sort of fill the void that they need in an import. He's sort of proven himself. He had a bit of an injury-riddled year and missed about 10 games or something last year in New Zealand, and I think he was carrying an injury even, into the season. So, but we saw what he was capable of. He had some huge games, and when he was fit and sort of found his role over there, especially sort of when Lamb got injured and he had to sort of step up, and he sort of played two different roles. He can play inside and was getting a stack of rebounds, getting double-doubles, but then he was also able to sort of step out of that and focus a little bit more on the scoring, and he could drop a three-point and play sort of on the perimeter as well. So I think it'll be really, really interesting. If they get him, he could be a good fit and sort of be able to, build those, as we mentioned, sort of Moneyball stats that you do need. They need points, they need rebounds, they need assists, and maybe he can be a big part of that. So, from my point of view, not knowing a lot about Martin, I think Cheatham definitely could fit into this roster and give them, the statistical side at least, of what they need in points and rebounds, and a little bit of flexibility to be able to play a little bit outside if Humphries is going to own the middle and own down low. So, I think definitely, a good signing, and it's good that we brought that up in this, because it is definitely a very possible thing that's going to break over the next week or so.
No, definitely. And I think obviously one thing we've been touching on throughout the podcast as well, and we just touched on some of their needs, is bringing in a strong leader. And, realistically, I'm not too sure, obviously, if Zylan Cheatham is that strong leader, or if Jarrell Martin is that strong leader as well. And I don't really know if Kendrick Davis is going to be the strong leader coming in, Lat Mayan. I have a lot of questions. I don't think they've really sorted out going from Mitch McCarron to who. I don't know if it's if it's something that they'll they'll obviously figure out going forward. But, Ryan, have you got some thoughts on, obviously, have they been successful in the off-season and if they've found their leader as well?
Yeah, well, I think just on exactly that you boys touched on now is that they're running the risk of having these competing egos and competing talents on the team, trying to say, okay, well, I can be the leader and give me a shot at it, and then you might have 3 or 4 guys trying to do that, and it's going to be about managing that expectation and those egos for Ninas, which he could be a really good manager of this, but it could also go south, not only for the team but for individual players who are trying to stamp their mark on their career. And considering maybe the team might not be so successful, you might then see individuals trying to outplay the team, and it all could just implode, or it could not. But you have seen it in other teams, especially in the NBA, where a lot of young talent on the team. You've had head coaching changes. You've had the vocal leaders and the older heads, the veterans, move on, and then it's just like, okay, it's a bunch of young guys. They don't care. They just want to ball out and be superstars in their own right, and it just again implodes. But it'll be an interesting interesting season nonetheless for Adelaide.
No, definitely. And a quick question for you, Ryan, though, without notice. Do you think a first-year coach, technically Scott Ninez is a first-year head coach for the Adelaide 36ers, do you think he's the right man to obviously be going into a season with potentially having to deal with egos and all that sort of stuff as well?
I don't know much about him as a person. I think if you just look at history about having those types of coaches in these roles, it's a very bad choice. I think you need to have a guy that's been there before, done that, knows how to manage those young players in this type of situation, whether you've done it as an assistant coach or a head coach of a previous team in the same position. And now, that experience doesn't grow on trees. So it's extremely hard to find that type of person. But, he's taken the role on, and he would have obviously been a part of the player movements and all of those things. But, he's putting his career on the line as well. Again, if this doesn't turn out and it just blows up in his face, there's a very, very strong chance that he doesn't get another shot at a head coaching role in the league.
Yeah, I think as well, Ryan. I think that is the biggest risk for him, and it's people management. And he has been around the club for a while in different roles, and sort of knows the club recently since sort of floating around and taking different opportunities around the league. But it's different when you've got to be the head guy. Like you can be an assistant coach and a player development coach and be able to cradle these guys and be their friend and build camaraderie with them through that channel. But when you're the guy where the buck stops with you and you've got to be a bit harsh and you've got to deal with these egos and these movements and this player wanting this, or even at the other end, you've built these close relationships with some of these young guys, and all of a sudden you're the guy that's got to cut their minutes and the relationship gets hurt. It is very, very, very frail. So it will be really interesting to see if he can hold this job and hold the Adelaide organisation under this period of development when you're still a club and you need results. And if it doesn't go well or start well, all of a sudden his job is under pressure again, and he's going to burn all those sort of relationships that were burnt when he got sacked. I don't know. It's almost like, say, 5-6 years ago. It was 2000 and I can't remember when he was the coach there, but it was a long time ago, and it took a long time for him to rebuild those relationships again and get trust with the club, and then it can all be under pressure again extremely quickly, especially dealing with these relationships. But I don't know, I sort of have a question, Josh. DJ, do you think he's going to be someone that steps up and takes this leadership role? He spent some time with the Boomers now, and he's obviously developing his stature in the league and obviously the key man that they're trying to build around in Adelaide.
Yeah, DJ's got all the pieces to be a strong leader, and I've been lucky enough myself to be able to have interviewed him a couple of seasons ago. And this was before obviously the explosion that we saw in NBL24 as the I guess the sort of figurehead, or one of the figureheads for the Adelaide 36ers. And I just think the whole thing about Dijon is the fact that he's a guy who's going to be not afraid to make the tough shots and not made to the tough calls. And he's got all the characteristics going forward of a leader, and obviously a team leader and a team captain going forward as well. So we've all made some very good points, I think, about the leadership side of it, and I'm looking forward to getting the off-season season grade, I should say, going forward from all of you guys. It's going to be very interesting, though. The city of churches could be again up in smoke with some fire and some fist fights as well. So it's going to be it's a very interesting NBL25 season for the 36ers. Now I'm going to start with you, Ryan. What do you rate the Adelaide 36ers off season as a whole?
Big fat C for mine. They have not brought in that leadership which I believe is necessary for the team. They have some shortcomings on the court as well, and some positional and different types, or what do you say, the variety of scoring that they need. So, and with all of this, and you say, we spoke about how they kind of had a resurgence towards the end of the season, and with any team in any sport, if you are trying to improve and be better, there's always if you're going to take the place of someone, they need to be worse. And I can't see a team above them haven't been gotten worse over this off season, and I would say they've probably had one of the worst off seasons, Adelaide. So I can't see them getting better in comparison to any other teams. They haven't made those adjustments in my eyes.
I think I don't know, Ryan. I agree with you there a little bit, and it is sort of a lower grade. But I think the key that they did in the off season, it mightn't be about the new faces that come in, but I think the key for them was that they made sure that Humphrey stayed, they made sure that DJ stayed, and that's what they're going to build their core around. I think that has to be a positive, not just about, I guess, the new faces coming in and the old faces that have left. So in retrospect, that's what they did in the off season. That was probably the major positive, because we've talked about the stuff that they're missing in the two signings that they have made. But the main positive for them was that they kept DJ and kept Humphreys and have got the building blocks for what they can possibly build towards the future in this long haul game. So I gave them also a B-, so not that far. But
you see, like they made that surge, and you could almost look at, say, okay, can we ride that momentum into next season and double down, bring in some veteran presence, or whatever it could be. And then it's like, okay, we were good, now let's just push our timeline 2 or 3 years down the track. And you see it in so many sports, the young guys are going to get tired of losing, and they're just going to start mucking up, or they're going to want to be traded or sign at a different club because they want to win. And if they think, okay, I'm good enough to win now, but my team isn't putting a squad around me, or they're not giving me the opportunity right now, then what stopped me from going somewhere else?
Yeah, definitely. I think you guys made some great points there. And, when you touched on there, Ryan, about what teams have gotten worse in the off-season, I think there's obviously one team that I'm going to put on the agenda quickly, and that's the Tasmanian Jack Jumpers. They're going to fall out of finals contention this year. But my grade...
Take it easy, mate. You're just bitter from the finals last year. Take it easy. We'll get there in future episodes, all right? Hold your horses.
We will. And I'll be definitely looking forward to that. There might be an E or an F grade being sent around for the Tasmanian Jack Jumpers off season.
Yeah, wait till we get to Perth.
But for myself...
F-. Rubbish.
But
Rubbish
for myself...
Nothing. They did nothing.
I've given the 36ers a D, to be honest with you. I just think what they've lost and what they've brought back in, I just don't see the correlation on what we saw last season. Now, obviously, it looks like going forward they're going to be rebuilding and obviously retooling to realistically make a very young team who's going to be very successful in 2 or 3 seasons' time. But I've got questions if Scott Ninnes is the guy for that. Is he the right development coach for this team to obviously take it forward? Or, I just got a lot of questions realistically around the Adelaide 36ers. So a D grade for myself. Now, that will wrap up today's episode. If you haven't already listened to the South East Melbourne NBL25 season preview, make sure you go check that out. Next episode, we will be touching on the Brisbane Bullets, the Cairns Taipans, I should say, actually, and their NBL25 off-season so far. Now, if you want to check out more, go check us out on YouTube. Go check us out on Instagram. Go check out our website, www.thebasketballfix.com. And that was ending today's episode. I've actually got the jitters here, boys. That's ending today's episode. If you hope you enjoyed the episode today, make sure you rate, review, and follow the podcast. And until next time, that was your Basketball Fix.